Good morning, welcome back. This is day 2 here at the World Economic Forum in Davos. You're watching HuffPost Live. I'm Ahmed Shahabuddin, and I am so thrilled to be joined by Muhtar Kent, CEO of Coca-Cola, as well as Maria Fanjul, the CEO of Entradas.com, and a global shaper, which we'll get to in just a little bit. You know, I want to start, Muhtar, by asking you, a few years ago here at Davos, the focus was on the global financial crisis. Now, that conversation has shifted to this year, which is focusing quite heavily on youth unemployment. You run a $48 billion company. Your primary purpose this year in Davos is to discuss global youth unemployment. And I know you're chairing the International Business Council, along with Klaus Schwab, to generate some ideas around this. And I'm curious, have there been any strategic directives that came out of that in the past day or two?
Well, actually, we've been working on this as the International Business Council of the World Economic Forum for quite a while. So we worked on this. We started talking about this subject last year at the International Business Council meeting, which I proudly chair currently. And we did a lot of preparatory work in the summer meeting in Geneva in August of 2013, so that we can have a really robust discussion and form what I call the golden triangle between business, government, and civil society, so that we can really bring some good ideas and turn them into action on the ground on how we deal with this incredibly pressing issue and opportunity of global youth unemployment. 75 million young people are unemployed, do not have opportunity to work at the moment. That's bigger than France.
This is in Europe?
This is globally.
Right.
And it is a terrible, terrible thing when people are coming into the workforce in their teens, late teens, or early 20s, and they don't have an opportunity to create value. So it is the obligation of business, it's the obligation of government, it's the obligation of civil society to come together to find solutions, to find creative solutions, long-lasting solutions, sustainable solutions, and that was what the meeting yesterday was about. And the other important thing that we focused on this time was bringing subnational government. Not national leaders, but subnational leaders. So we had mayors from all around the world, we had of large cities, we had governors of large provinces,
right,
from India, from Canada. And these are all CEOs of urban centers that can collaborate with business leaders, they can collaborate with NGOs. We had the head of the OECD, we had labor organizations there, and we had the global shapers there. And global shapers bring a new voice, a new way of thinking about, because they are themselves, they are the youth, and we're talking about their opportunities and their issues. And I think we really, they really help the dialogue, to shape the dialogue. They are shapers.
After all, and you know what I loved is how you framed it as, you know, obviously a problem, but more importantly, an opportunity.
Sure.
Because the statistics, as we all know, are sobering. I mean, you said 75 million. The World Bank estimates it's 300 million people, a quarter of the world's youth population, who can't find productive work. In Europe, 24% of the youth are unemployed. A lot of people, as you know, the media loves appellations and terms, are calling this a lost generation. In Greece, Portugal, Italy, it's just as bad. The Middle East, North Africa, Spain, you know, Maria, of course, as you know, it's reached, what, 57%, almost 60% amongst the youth. And I'm curious, you know, when you think, you're a global shaper, perhaps you could explain to us what that is exactly for those who don't know. When you think about this, do you see it as an opportunity, and where do you see the role of businesses?
So, yes, as part of the Global Shapers community, which is a community from the World Economic Forum of young people under 30, we're 3,000 global shapers all over the world. 50 of us are here in Davos. And we see that this is a big issue. And since we are here, the youth are involved in this issue, we should also be part of the solution. That's why we need to be proactive and we need to propose solutions because we have a completely different perspective than what businesses and governments have. And that's very important because our perspective can add a lot of ideas on the table that can be carried out and maybe potential solutions to this problem.
And to both of your points, obviously this is a collaborative effort. Everyone has to be on board, not just government leaders at the top national level. To your point, you had a lot of sub-governmental leaders, also businesses. But Muhtar, I want to ask you, there is a sense of disillusionment, I think, across the board when it comes to youth. That people don't care. We saw this most recently 3-4 years ago in a very explosive kind of expression of this sense of disillusionment in the Arab world, where a lot of my friends are, where there's a brain drain, where there's an educated mass of youth. They feel as though there are no opportunities, and they feel as though businesses are always looking for a quick profit. With that in mind, I want to quote something Professor Muhammad Yunus said recently. He said, "The world is not about making money, but about sustainability. There are other incentives in life than profit, achievement being one of them, accomplishment, and glory." What would you say to those disillusioned youth? I mean, how can they trust not only businesses, but governments to prioritize this for them?
Yeah, and I think Yunus said it right. I think the role of business is not just to make profit, it is to create value for a host of stakeholders. That is when business becomes sustainably successful, creating value for a host of stakeholders. And that, I think, is the critical element here. And the big societal problems, Ahmed, of the world today are not solvable by business alone, government alone, or civil society, universities, and NGOs alone. You have to create this golden triangle, connect it really well, and connect it in a flexible manner, because not one size fits all and not one solution fits all in every country. And you've got to listen to the millennial generation and not pay lip service to it, but really listen well, really understand their point of view, integrate their point of view into what you're going to do. And that's why, I think that one of the best things that the WEF has done in the last few years is create together with the support of companies like mine, companies like Abraj, companies like Alliance, the three companies that founding supporters of the Young Global Shapers, Coca-Cola, Alliance, and Abraj. And we now have this voice that we can listen to, we can understand where they're coming from, what they're saying, and where they want to go.
Right.
And I think without this kind of practicality, I don't think we can go forward. And therefore, it is the obligation of business, because if we fail, if we're not successful in creating better opportunities, I think there's a real danger that the social peace and fabric of the world is at danger. I really do. I think, up to now in the world, certainly since the last 60, 70 years, every generation had better opportunity than its previous generation. For the first time, that's about to change. And if we don't do anything radically fast, effective, then I think we will end up where none of us will like where we are. So from my perspective, it's not only trying to do the right thing, but it's also selfishly important, because if you are able to reduce the unemployment rate for the youth by 1%, 1% globally, that adds $75 billion to the world economy. That it makes a better world economy, that makes better middle class, that makes a better environment for all of us.
And I read that statistic, I think, in a piece you wrote for CNN along with Klaus.
Yeah.
And what's really compelling about this is it might seem obvious, but if this were to happen, you would see then an increase both in innovation, you would see an increase both in sustainability and an outlook, obviously. But I do wonder if there are cultural issues at play. And that's what I'd love to talk about as well, because it's easy to parse the numbers. But for example, Maria, I know that you ran a company with Spanish tech entrepreneurs, you're making links with Silicon Valley. And you said that there was a lack of entrepreneurship culturally in Spain in particular. What does that even mean? Because there are many other people who I speak to from different regions around the world where they're also suffering from these issues who voice the same concern that there's a cultural problem here.
Yeah, that means everything. That means that when you're a kid and at school, you're afraid of raise your hand and ask a dumb question. That means that when you're thinking about starting a company, or when you're working for a company and you propose an idea and it fails, then you've done something wrong. So that means that you are not able to try it again because you failed, and that is completely wrong to me. It should be the other way around. So it's been told a lot of times about failing as a process of learning, and I saw it completely different in Spain versus Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that we need to change. We need to change it in Europe, in Southern Europe, in Spain, so that we can celebrate entrepreneurs and celebrate success, and to put these role models and show it to the rest of the society so that people can learn from that, learn from these best practices, and also learn from what they did wrong.
Yeah, and when you talk about the different cultures and regions, there were some concerns voiced from Northern European countries, Western countries, that some of the Southern countries, there is a cultural laziness, and that must be what's behind these higher unemployment numbers. And I do want to just kind of look at some different countries. According to a recent survey of employers in 9 countries, Brazil, Germany, India, Mexico, Morocco, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and the UK, and the US, that's a mouthful, only 43% of employers say they're able to find skilled, entry-level workers, which is obviously fundamental and critical to any economy thriving. With that in mind, Turkey's economy has been growing. There are other parts of the world where this isn't as big of a problem. Based on what Maria was saying about the cultural aspect of this, how can businesses remedy that? I mean, I know that you were also talking about in the piece job security here in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, where I went to high school. It was very common to see the reason that there might be low unemployment is because of these apprenticeship programs, these kind of dual education systems. How can we mimic that and shift cultures without completely, importing a new culture?
Yeah, great question. I think that's one of the subjects that we discussed yesterday. We separated the discussions into 9 different work streams and had every work stream report out related to the entrepreneurialism, how to foster that. In fact, Maria reported out, was one of the people that reported out from one of those sessions yesterday in the larger IBC meeting, International Business Council meeting of the World Economic Forum. So education is a key component which needs to also essentially overhaul itself so that it can produce the kind of generation that business is looking for today. So there is a mismatch. There is a mismatch between what business is looking for, small, medium, large, and what is coming out of the educational system. There is a rigidity in some labor laws around the world, particularly in Europe, about hiring creating apprenticeships. There is an issue related to the accreditation of apprenticeships. There's an issue related to how companies can create internships in a lasting manner. So we need to get rid of the barriers, and we need to ensure that we can have these best practices from all around the world circulated so that these golden triangles on the ground can create success stories in reducing youth unemployment in different urban centers around the world. Because we shouldn't look at the world in terms of countries or regions. We should look at the world in cities, urban centers. And today, when you think about it, about 250 urban centers around the world, where about 25% of the population is living, create about 55% of the GDP of the world. So that's where we need to focus, working with mayors, large or small, with governors who can really act fast, who want to act fast, like business, like the young global shapers. And so we can just funnel these learnings and create more apprenticeships,
Right.
Better education, work with universities to have shorter periods of education where you can basically have professional education.
As part of it.
As part of it. So there's nothing wrong with being a carpenter. You can have a really good life. You know, you can create small businesses that can employ, more electricians, and profession is an important piece. But all of those things, apprenticeships that are created have to be accredited.
Right.
So they have value, so people can move from one job to another and create mobility as well.
Right, social mobility. You know, when we talk about culture and youth culture, one thing that I'm sure you know very well is alive and thriving is technology and the media, social media in particular. Obviously here at Davos, technology and its disruptive elements, if you will, is a big part of the conversation across the board in all disciplines. And I do want to ask you, I mean, for example, Coca-Cola, even just your Facebook page, more than 76 million likes, one of the biggest in the world. Now, what does that mean in terms of how we can actually translate that or leverage that into connecting people around ideas, connecting people around business communities online, across the board in cities, as you said, not thinking of the world as countries, to try to expand and enhance this push that you're trying to make. And I'm curious, when it comes to social media, you saw people in, the U.S. who have similar grievances to people in the Arab world, in Cairo, in Lebanon, where, again, as I mentioned, there are brain drains. My friends in Lebanon, so many of them, as much as they love their country, are looking to get out, to travel elsewhere. And the internet can play a role. I'm just not exactly sure what the best role is, and I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
I think internet, technology, social media, all can play a big role, and I'm sure Maria has her views on that too, by creating awareness quicker, by moving better ideas quicker, and by convening people, not in person, but virtually, in a much more effective way to create solutions.
Right.
And I think that we all need to understand that. Technology, social media, communication is going to change the way, the definition of work.
That's true.
There will be a lot more people, Ahmed, working and creating value from their homes. You don't need bricks and mortar anymore. You don't need to travel to a place.
Right.
All you need is a place that you can convene and talk to people, look at each other in the eye, but at the end, you use technology to circulate everything else.
And not just to share ideas, to your point, but as you're suggesting, to actually gain skills online. I mean, are you optimistic with this kind of push in technology, with all these conversations that you've been a part of at the IBC? I mean, are you optimistic for Spain and for youth across the world, Maria?
Yeah, of course. I think technology, as Muhtar was saying, is transforming the world. It has transformed industries, and now it's like a horizontal platform that is changing the way we behave, the way we communicate, the way we share. It's I see a difference in probably younger generations where we're more based on open platforms. For example, I run a technology-based company, and we use open source technologies.
Yeah.
That's an example.
Which also
of
levels the playing field.
Exactly. So one of the ideas that we were proposing as global shapers that came out from a meeting in Madrid was for young kids to learn how to code at school since they're very young, and giving the same importance to software skills than math or literature or other other courses.
Other disciplines, yes, certainly. And obviously this is all alive and well. And for as much as we want to be optimistic, the problems, for example, in what's happening in Ukraine and Kiev, a lot of it is born out of this frustration.
There's a lot of frustration.
Yeah, there's a lot of frustration, but at the same time, the internet and the youth culture, I would argue, there's also a lot of optimism and hope. And without hope, of course, and without these kinds of initiatives and collaborations, we would be, I guess, less hopeful and less optimistic. And so I want to thank you both for joining us, for sharing your insights.
Thank you.
Maria and Muhtar, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Lots more conversations coming up here. Day 2 of the World Economic Forum here in Davos, so be sure to stay tuned.